Now I'm very excited to have an interview with one of the leading experts on blue carbon projects. And actually, when I first heard about blue carbon, your name came up immediately. So it's like, when I hear, when I talk about blue carbon, you're always there in the background. So I'm really excited to speak with you today. So this session is about developing blue carbon projects, and of course, it's a blue carbon project is all about, as we have talked about before, really harnessing those ecosystems that we have in the ocean, mangroves, seagrass, coral reefs, and so on. So kind of to build this kind of this potential to remove carbon, but also to have biodiversity thrive, to remove pollution as well. And there remains this deficit in terms of projects to really meet these investment demands that we have. And we really need to build on those. So I'm excited to introduce Carlos Duarte. He is a professor at the King Abdullah University of Science and Technology, and of course, a preeminent expert on blue carbon. So thanks a lot for joining.
Thank you.
So yeah, have a seat. So yeah, so basically, in terms of building on what we've just talked about, obviously Brad has talked about carbon dioxide removal in terms of technological solutions. But obviously, what we have in the ocean is an incredible array of amazing blue carbon system, nature-based solutions. So Carlos, in terms of your research, of course, you focus a lot on kind of understanding the effects of global change in more kind of marine ecosystems, developing these kind of nature-based solutions, such as blue carbon, of course. And it's at the heart of this kind of nature-based, this drive for nature-based solutions. So why is blue carbon so critical for solving kind of these global challenges, with these interconnected challenges of climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution? And why is the time now to really focus on it?
Thank you for the question and also the invitation to have this conversation. So we just heard from the previous speaker that we are at a situation where we really need to activate all possible solutions to meet our climate goals with the best of our ambition. So sometimes when we talk about climate change, we always think about fossil fuels and energy, but the reality is that 38% of the accumulated greenhouse gases released to the atmosphere actually don't come from fossil fuels. They come from destroying ecosystems and messing up with nature. So in carbon accounting, this is called land use change, but in fact, it does include the ocean as well, but it's hidden in that very inappropriate name. So it follows that 1/3 of the solution can possibly come from repairing nature. And whereas we have already taken action on repairing forests, we are now starting to look at the oceans as one system that needs to be repaired. So that belongs to the class of solutions called nature-based solutions, and we heard about how we need to decarbonize, but in fact we also need to recarbonize. So nature-based solutions, I define them as an approach to decarbonize the atmosphere by recarbonizing the biosphere. So we have lost about half of the blue natural capital of the ocean that supports the essential processes that underpin our well-being. And now if we repair that and recover that 50% of blue natural capital that we lost, we have an opportunity to make a clear impact in achieving our climate goals. But I mentioned blue natural capital, and that word implies that there is value on nature.
That's right.
But for 2,000 years, we have not recognized that value because the ocean was declared terra nullius by the Justinian Code, which means there was nobody's land and nobody cared. And for the first time, I think if you take a step back and look at blue carbon, is the first time, I think, since 2,000 years, that there is value and actually real monetary value in investing in repairing marine ecosystems while they're still alive and healthy, rather than when we extract and kill from them.
Yes, that's a great point. I mean, we have a common friend with Ralph Sharmy. I don't know if you've heard Ralph Sharmy, the name might ring a bell. He's obviously very much a proponent of the living economy. The extractive economy is we take everything out, but it's actually the living economy that has all that natural capital that you talked about. So, I mean, could you tell us a bit more about kind of those broader benefits as well? I mean, we mentioned that, of course, we are talking about blue carbon and the word carbon is in it. But actually, the benefits of these ecosystems go much wider, right?
That's right. That's why we need to think about blue natural capital rather than have a carbon-centric view of nature. So when we think of blue carbon projects in terms of blue natural capital, the climate mitigation benefits are just one component of the project, but there are also adaptation benefits that always reside with the local community, whereas the mitigation benefits benefit everybody. The adaptation benefits are really the beneficiaries of the local community. But we also have contributions to food security, we have contributions to employment and improved livelihoods, resilient communities. So in fact, we're really touching upon all SDGs. And therefore, when we scope projects on blue carbon, we really need to be aware, both the project owner and the investor need to be aware of the whole suite of benefits and ensure that we maximize all of the returns.
Yeah. Makes sense. I mean, everyone's saying, what is the silver bullet to meet all of the SDGs? And here we are in Lisbon. It's almost 5 p.m. On the 28th of February. Before almost
invest in nature.
Exactly, that's it. We've solved it. So we had the backlash, of course, recently. I mean, you've heard all of this. The investigative journalism. They came in. They found that obviously there are kind of these kind of tropical forests that have been kind of over-reported in terms of their the benefit in terms of carbon storage and so on. And I mean, there's obviously questions now around transparency, accountability, where are the standards. How do you see that evolve when it actually comes to blue carbon?
Yeah, so first of all, I'd like to share that when you look at the hiccups with blue carbon projects that have occurred or even other nature-based solutions, you don't need to think that these are specific of blue carbon or nature-based solutions. In fact, every new market is subject to gold rush behavior, and there's issues of failure of transparency, corruption, and so on. So the remedy to that is governance and transparency. And I believe that it's very important that all governments that are considering to open up their coastal waters for blue carbon investment, they need to consolidate the rules and regulations in their code, in the law. And that will give clarity of how the projects will be developed, how the benefits will flow, and that will really sort a lot of these problems that we discussed. And also, I believe there is a need to consolidate a minimum price for carbon. So we avoid also practices such as some agents buying carbon credits from blue carbon projects at very low price and then reselling them at 10 times the price to make a profit, which also is very negative. So the argument is that some blue carbon projects are low quality. If they're low quality, they shouldn't be a project. And if they're all high quality projects, then they should have a minimum price that is fair and is independent of nation.
And as part of this conversation around setting these fair prices and making sure there's accountability, there's this focus now on these kind of third-party verification companies, right? Because that was part of the backlash was about, are they actually doing what they're supposed to do? So what is your view on that? Can that work in the blue carbon context and having these kind of third parties do this kind of?
Well, as a scientist working on carbon accounting in marine ecosystems for 40 years, then I'm not terribly impressed by the current verification systems. And the reason for that is that they were transposed directly from forest accounting into the ocean without realizing that the ocean works very differently from forest on land. So in my opinion, most of the verification systems violate the oldest principle of science. There's the principle of parsimony. And the best enunciation of what this is came from Albert Einstein that said that everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So when I go through the verification protocols, I see possibly something like 2/3 of the elements and steps are really unnecessary, but they burden the process, they create a unnecessary cost to the project, and they're not effective. So I believe we need to rethink the verification systems, and that requires a partnership between those third-party actors and scientists to come up with processes that are fit for purpose.
Yeah, you mentioned already those kind of collaborations that are required, working with kind of the owners of the credit, the different kind of intermediaries and so on, and the governments that set the standards. But what is the role of kind of these community level engagement? I mean, obviously we talk about this a lot, in the sessions. We need to engage with communities, but probably for blue carbon, it is really there because I mean, one project that we highlighted at the World Ocean Initiative is the project, the Makoko Pomoja project in Kenya with the mangroves and so on. We did a video with that community and so on, and really highlighting that these kind of projects that can create jobs, that can create community level engagement. Can you expand on that? Why is that so important, especially in the context of blue carbon?
So community engagement is absolutely key for a successful project because we need to consider that the permanency requirement of the carbon in the project is actually adopted for 100 years. 100 years is 3 human generations. So that means that when you start a project, you are committing 3 human generations. Myself, if I was a project owner, my daughter, and my grandson. And in fact, it is them that are going to do the heavy lifting. So there is no government on the planet that can guarantee continuity through 3 generations, only communities can. Because of that intergenerational dialogue, and which is actually at the root of the concept of sustainability. So engaging communities is key, but I would say we have missed throughout one SDG, which I pledge should be the 18th SDG, and that's very relevant to what we discussed, which is youth empowerment. Because we're making a lot of commitments for our youth, and yet they are not at the table. I don't see, B&H in this room is maybe 50-something, so we're making commitments for my daughter, for my grandson, for your daughters and sons and grandchildren, but they need to have a seat at the table because they need to have a voice and they need to be part of the designing the future that we should not be designed for them because the future belongs to them.
It's a really good point. Thank you very much for making that point. And actually, this is one of the reasons why, we have the Ocean Changemakers Challenge, where actually we were very encouraged to see, last year we launched our event in Halifax, to see a lot of blue carbon projects. And I know the Uplink Challenge from the World Economic Forum there, in a similar way, they're seeing a lot of blue carbon projects come up. So, and that is often driven by young people. It's often driven by innovators, young innovators, right?
Yeah, and I see we also suffer now globally from issues of mental well-being, particularly among our youth, because the future we depict for them is just too dark to be accepted. But, and that kind of reveals my generation. So a singer called Joan Baez, so I already disclosed that I'm from the 60s, then once wrote that action is the remedy to despair. So let's take the children out of the streets where they're yelling that they want us to take action, and let's empower them to take action. That will be the best possible solution for improving their mental well-being and their future outlook for them and our children.
Yes, definitely. And you mentioned a couple of those kind of ingredients that we need to kind of get from where we are. So let's say by 2030 to have really blue carbon really embedded in the solutions. You mentioned, like, for example, having those kind of regulation in place, having the minimum carbon price, having the youth empowerment, having the community level engagement. What else do we need? How do we go from where we are now to a world where blue carbon is appreciated, it's valued, it's part of the solution kit?
Well, I've actually seen a lot of progress. I'm optimistic because since we developed the name, and that was in our report in 2009, where I was asked by colleagues in different UN agencies to write a report about how we could contribute to mitigate climate change through conserving and restoring marine habitats. So that was called the Blue Carbon Report, the role of healthy oceans in binding carbon. That's the first time that the term was coined. It's 13 years later. I think there's a lot of uptake on the concept and a lot of awareness of the benefits. But when we look at mangrove, seagrasses, and salt marshes, which are the focus of blue carbon projects, they occupy combined less than 0.2% of the seafloor. So what about the other 99.8%? There's every hectare of ocean has the potential to remove carbon and contribute to climate action. So we need to expand the concept beyond the shorelines and also discover how can we activate and be stewards of the oceans in the continental shelves and elsewhere to also manage that part of the ocean contribution to carbon removal.
Yeah, that's a great point, Carlos. And actually, we've just kind of released, I think this week, we've released a blog from the Ocean Frontiers Institute. They're looking very much into deep blue carbon. And we heard from Brad as well that this is a crucial topic. I just wanted to ask if there's any question. We probably have time for one question. There's one here in the front. Please state your name and affiliation.
Good afternoon. My name is Gail Davis. I do a lot of work with UN Civil Society. I have a question for you, and that is, I hear you say youth, need to be empowered. Do you feel, because my strong opinion is that instead of us separating ourselves into silos, couldn't we all work together and create what the future would look like? And if you could get behind that, how would you create that, sir?
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. In fact, I think you use the right word that we need to co-create a future, but in the conversation, youth is missing. So it's not that we leave the room, but we invite youth to join us, and we invite also minorities to join us in that conversation and empower people from developing nations also to contribute. And I have a particular focus on small island developing states which I think are going to be the main beneficiaries of blue carbon, because they typically they're in a very strong predicament, an existential predicament, and the population is less than 1% of the global population, but you and your colleagues from small island states are owners and custodians to 30% of the ocean space. So you have a big role to play, and you actually are the wealthiest citizens of the world in blue carbon resources. So make use of those. But in terms of bringing the youth, last year, now 2 years ago, in COP26, I was part of the Saudi delegation, and I accompanied actually a student of mine who was part of the negotiation team. I went with her they were negotiating transparency and other mechanisms that were really tough negotiations. I went with her to the room. She's 25, her name is Noura, and I sat behind her and saw her taking the floor on behalf of the country and being very eloquent in making her points. But I look around, and I only saw 8 nations that had people of her generation. Everybody else was really looking like me, like typically white males of 60 years old, which are doing that as a chess game. So in COP26, I take your tower, COP27, you take my pawn, and this and that, because there's really nothing at stake for them. For me, 2050, it's an arbitrary number because I'm not going to be around. I hopefully will be sequestering carbon somewhere on the ground. But for them, it really means a lot. And I could see among the only 8 people that were there of her age, and there were actually 7 from developing nations and only 1 from a developed state, and she was not taking the floor, she was just behind in a supporting role. I could see a lot more empathy in finding solutions for the problems that I can see between the likes of me.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but it's great to speak with you, Carlos. And of course, you mentioned small island development states. Actually, we also call them big ocean states because of exactly that. This natural capital that is there means their economies are actually much bigger, much more valuable than the common understanding. But it was great to speak with you, obviously talking about the need to co-create, to get the youth involved, also to build those kind of standards, to have the government work on those kind of regulatory approaches, but also having that kind of minimum carbon price and the need to kind of spread the message about the benefits of blue carbon. So thank you very much, Carlos.
Certainly, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.